Hey guys, my name is Francisco Hernandez and today's video is going to be an editing video. I do have a couple of editing videos already on my channel, but for every single photo that I take, it's going to be a little bit different. Still the same kind of process overall, but every edit is different. So I'll make these every once in a while, and a lot of you guys have been asking me recently, what's my editing process? So that's why I'm making this video. Before I continue, I do want to let you guys know that this video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for people who love to learn, want to explore their creativity, and want to learn new skills. You can invest in yourself and your personal growth with Skillshare. If there's a specific skill that you're trying to learn, Skillshare is the perfect place to start because they have classes on pretty much everything that I can think of. Not just photography and off-camera flash, but business, marketing, productivity, and so much more that you just need to go to Skillshare yourself to check out all the different classes. One class that I've been looking into a lot recently is called YouTube Success Script, Shoot, and Edit with MKBHD. He's an amazing creator that I've been following for years, and I highly recommend this class. One tip that I picked up on is planning out your visuals, and this is something I kind of already do when it comes to photo shoots, so I just need to really translate that to video because it is something I do need to work on. There's a lot of benefits to joining Skillshare, including the fact that it's ad-free, so you're always in the zone where you're exploring those new skills. They launch new premium classes every single week, so there's always something new to discover, and their entire catalog of classes offers subtitles in Spanish, French, Portuguese, and German. If you guys are interested in trying Skillshare out, be sure to use my link in the description area below, because the first 1,000 of you to use that link will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. When you guys support the people that support my channel, it allows me to keep making free content for you guys, so definitely check out Skillshare. Okay, so we are going to start in Lightroom and then move into Photoshop, but if you guys have a different processor you prefer, like Capture One or something else, definitely do use that. I just tend to use Lightroom because I'm more familiar with it. I've been using it for like 10 plus years now, and it does organize my files pretty nicely, so that's why I use it. So let's go ahead and just start with the photo. This isn't the photo that I'm going to be working with right now. I took this photo with the 600 Pro, the Godox 8600 Pro, also known as the Explorer 600 Pro by Adorama, and I used the 36-inch Perisnap, which is a softbox that folds nice and flat. And I also used the Sony a7R II with the Sigma Art 105 1.4 at f1.4, 1/2500th of a second at ISO 100. This picture right now isn't the photo that I wanted to edit. This picture right here is the better pose. I thought this was a better pose, and I did add a tiny little bit more ambient at 1/2000th of a second. So I'll show you guys exactly how I would edit this photo. One thing that you're always going to see me doing to my photos is using the adjustment brush. And what that is in Lightroom is a brush where you can apply different effects to wherever you paint with that brush. So what I use the adjustment brush for is changing the highlights in certain areas where I feel like they're too bright, or increasing the shadows in areas where I want a little bit more detail. So for this picture, before I do the adjustment brushes, I'll do that in a second, I always do a couple of other things. I increase the saturation, and I do a tiny little bit of sharpening, and then I move into the adjustment brushes. So right now with the saturation, the way that I'm going to boost it up a lot is in the develop module section of Lightroom. I'm going to go ahead and scroll all the way down to the bottom. In this calibration section, in the blue primary saturation slider, I always adjust this quite a bit high. I'm going to go to 80 right now, but it's always going to be from 60 to 80. I'll start high with 80. And right now the colors did go up quite a bit. Usually the oranges and the blues go up a lot. And since she does have a little bit of orange tones in her skin, it is a little bit too saturated in her skin tone. So the way that I counteract that is I go into the hue, saturation, luminance section, specifically the saturation section, and I go ahead and just turn down the slider of the orange a little bit. From negative 10 to negative 15 is usually okay. Negative 10 does look fine, and it does look fine in terms of the skin tones and the saturation. So then I'll move on to the next thing that I want to adjust. So I'll go ahead and go to the detail section and change the amount. My default is 40. It might be different for you. And then just change it to 60. And now since I've adjusted the saturation to my liking and added that little bit of sharpening, now I'm going to go ahead and add a lot of different adjustment brushes. And before I start to add those different brushes, I need to think mentally, what do I want to adjust about this picture? So I do see a couple different things. For one, I feel like the highlights are very strong, so I'm going to do a little bit of reduction in terms of the highlights. I also want to increase the shadows a little bit in the tree section over here, and a little bit behind her in this little area. And I think the third thing that I'll do is just add a little bit of exposure brightness, adding a little bit of more exposure to her legs because I feel like they're a tiny little bit dark. And now that I kind of have a general map of what I want to do, then I'll just go ahead and get the adjustment brush right now. The shortcut for Lightroom is going to be K. And then now I can go ahead and do a lot of different adjustments to my picture. So what I'm gonna do right now is just start painting in the shadow area. And I will go ahead and always adjust the size of my brush so that I'm not painting, you know, with a big old brush everywhere. If I were to paint between her legs right now, it's gonna paint on her legs. So I need to change the size to be like this. So I'm gonna go ahead and just paint there. And right now, what I usually do is I'll just go ahead and just paint on where I want to affect it and then add the effect. Or if you want to go ahead and see the effect as you're painting it, then you can just go to effect right here and then go to shadows. If you have a preset for shadows, it should already be applied. But right now I don't have anything. I have all these blank. So I'm gonna go ahead and just increase the shadows to 50 and see how that looks like, and then apply it to the rest of this tree. And usually when I do any sort of adjustments, I try to avoid the skin, because the effect that I'm doing to the photo with the adjustment brush will look good in certain areas. But when you apply it generally, usually on the skin tones, if you add a reduction or if you reduce the highlights in the skin, it'll look dull. And then if you increase the shadows on the skin, then it becomes a little bit weird looking. I did make a video describing editing mistakes, and that was one thing that I really wanted to really let you guys know never to do. Try to always avoid adding shadows and reducing the highlights on the skin, because it just won't look realistic. One thing that will help you out in seeing if you went overboard and painted in areas that you didn't intend to paint over, like for example, like I said, don't paint on the skin. What you can do to really see if you did do that mistake is increase the exposure a lot. And you can see I actually forgot to paint some area right here by her leg. And you can see I did paint over the leg right there. So I'm gonna go ahead and do my best to just go ahead and fix that, paint in the shadow area, and take off the effect in areas on the skin where I didn't want to add that effect. To paint off the effect, you're gonna hold down Alt, and then now you can delete that effect. I know it looks pretty weird right now, but again, we're only increased the exposure 4 stops to see where I painted everything. And then now I'm gonna go ahead and just remove the exposure. And now I can see exactly what I did to the picture. Usually what I'll do is I'll go ahead and just delete the effect and then bring it back and think, okay, does this look fine to me? And right now it does look pretty good to me. It looks fine. And now I just move to the next thing. So I did also want to reduce the highlights in the picture. So I'm gonna go ahead and get another adjustment brush, and I'm gonna go ahead and just paint about -100, I believe, for this picture will be fine. And then I'll go ahead and also, sometimes what I'll do is also reduce the whites, maybe -25, and it'll do a good job at kind of reducing the highlights a little bit more. So I'm gonna go ahead and just do that now. Again, I'm gonna go ahead and just delete the effect and then bring it back so you guys can see exactly what I just adjusted to my picture. This third thing I wanted to do was bring up the exposure of the legs, which I'm gonna do again with another adjustment brush. And I'm gonna go ahead and just paint on it first, then I'll just bring up the exposure. And I already know that I'm painting kind of messily, so I'll fix that right now. I'll just speed up the video right now. Okay, so 0.5, adding a little bit of just a half a stop of exposure to the legs did look fine to me. I'm gonna go ahead and just delete it so you guys can see exactly how it looked like before and then after. And then the last thing I'll do is adjust the eyes. When it comes to the eyes, I will have 2 different presets, one for dark eyes and one for light eyes. And I believe if I add the dark eyes adjustment, I do think it'll be a little bit too much, because usually it's for like dark eyes, and her eyes were a little bit light. So yeah, it's a little bit overboard. But again, this is gonna be helpful to see exactly where I'm adjusting or adding that different effect. So it is a bit overboard right now, and I can just reduce the exposure to maybe 0.8 and it'll look fine. It does look a tiny little bit overboard when zoomed in, but when I zoom out, it looks fine. So now that I have the picture pretty much adjusted how I wanted it, now I can move this picture into Photoshop. Actually, I think the last thing that I had adjusted to this picture when I did my first initial round of processing was I did add a lot of vibrance to this picture. I think I added 40, and it actually looks pretty nice. Maybe a little bit too saturated in some areas, but I can always reduce it a little bit in Photoshop. So now I'll move into Photoshop. Okay, so now that we're in Photoshop, before I begin, I do want to let you guys know that this picture, I did take another look at the image and see that when I increased the shadows, it did look a little bit funky. So I just deleted that effect, the adjustment brush in Lightroom. So if you guys are looking at the picture before in Lightroom earlier in this video, and you're looking at this one and you're seeing why does it look different, it's because I took off that increased exposure in the shadows. So now let's go ahead and just work with this picture. When it comes to Photoshop, what I'll do is I'll always do some sort of dodge and burn, frequency separation, and maybe adjusting the colors in different areas. And maybe some areas I will go ahead and just remove in terms of distractions. For this picture, it doesn't really seem like there's too many distractions, so I don't think I need to remove anything. But I do actually have an action to do all those different things to at least get everything ready for me to do a little bit of that frequency separation, dodge and burn, and change the colors. I will run it right now, but this is something that I just learned over time, and I made that action to kind of increase the efficiency of my workflow. But if you guys want to learn about those different things, I think it's best that people who are a little bit more experienced with that teach you guys. So I do recommend two different channels. I recommend the channel Pix Imperfect and the channel Flern, and you guys will learn about those different processes a lot with them. When it comes to doing frequency separation, I will pretty much always use this for any sort of wrinkles in the clothing. It does a great job at reducing how bad some wrinkles can look. Or if there's some areas of the skin that I feel like are a little bit rough, I'll use frequency separation to soften those different areas. And usually what I'll do is I'll zoom into 100% and scan the image to see if there's anything that needs softening. And for this image, it's not anything bad at all, but I feel like her legs could benefit a little bit from adding a little bit of softening. So I'm gonna go ahead and just zoom in on the legs at 100% and see what I want to change. So I'm not at 100%, I am at 33.33%, but it's pretty much zoomed in at a good level where I can see everything. So what I'm gonna do right now is grab the mixer brush, it's right here, and this is something that I will use with frequency separation because it's pretty much the best thing that you can do to soften and smoothen pretty much the skin without looking too weird. So I'm gonna go ahead and make sure that the color is selected, and I do have certain settings here on the top. And now I'm gonna go ahead and just paint in a little bit of strokes on the skin while avoiding painting off of the skin. So I don't wanna do something like start on the skin and paint off because it's gonna add that color to those different areas. So I'm gonna go ahead and just repeat this process on the legs, kind of small brushes, and I'm also gonna adjust the size of the brush too. So I'll show you guys exactly what I'm gonna do right now, just a little bit sped up. And just like in Lightroom before, I'm going to show you guys how it looks like before and after. So this is after, and this is before. Before and after. And if you do feel like this is overboard, what you can do is reduce the opacity of the entire layer itself. Or if you want to be more selective, which is usually how I try to be, I'll go ahead and just make this folder, the frequency separation folder, into a mask, and then I'll paint off the effect little by little until I feel like it's normal, or at least not normal, but not overboard. I did see that on her collarbone area, I did want to soften that up just a tiny bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and just do the same thing like I did with the legs. Just get that mixer brush, paint a little bit, and then I'll show you guys after I do that. One thing that I am being careful not to mess up is changing the shadows from where they are right now. So right now, if I were to paint this shadow area into this brighter area where there's highlights, then that would be changing the shadows. It would be putting shadow into area where it wasn't. So try to always kind of keep everything in terms of highlights and shadows where they are. So right here, there is a bit of a tan line, and actually frequency separation with this mixer brush can actually help with that. So I'm gonna paint this way over here, even going over the shirt, and then with that mask over the group layer, the layers in the group, I'll just kind of paint off the shirt. So I'm just gonna let you guys know that's what I'm gonna do right now, and I'll show you how to fix it. So you can see that I did go over the shirt quite a lot. So I'm gonna go ahead and get the mask now, and I'm gonna paint black on the things that I want to hide. So I did mess up and add color onto that shirt, so I'm gonna be hiding that by painting black on the mask. So again, here is the before and here is the after. Now I'm gonna zoom out and go into dodge and burn. So I always have two different types of dodge and burn. One dodge and burn is going to be called micro dodge and burning. That's going to be zooming in and changing the exposures of the skin, very zoomed in at 100%. And the other one is going to be global dodge and burn. So for example, I saw on the leg earlier that there was this little bit of, I don't know, maybe a birthmark, maybe a bruise, something different. I saw it right here. And when it comes to doing dodge and burn, one thing that you can do to kind of really highlight where those differences of exposure are going to be in the skin is adding a black and white layer, and it should kind of show and highlight how different the skin is going to look like. And right now it's a little bit too dark, so I'm going to go ahead and just get this layer and change the reds and the yellows to maybe like this level here, where I can see where it's a little bit dark right here, down here, and over here. And basically, again, this layer is just to help you see exactly what you want to dodge and burn, to kind of correct the inconsistencies of the skin. So now I'm going to go ahead and go to micro dodge and burn and get a brush and make sure that I'm painting with a very, very low flow, high opacity, and making sure that the hardness is going to be 0. And when it comes to dodge and burn, this is something that you gotta learn over time. When it comes to doing micro dodge and burn, it's a little bit easier. Global dodge and burn is a little bit more challenging. So when you're zoomed in like this, you just need to go ahead and just paint white over those areas where it's a little bit dark to brighten them, or if it's a little bit too dark or too light, darken them. So right now I just fixed that little bit of a shadow or whatever, maybe it was a bruise, let's just call it a bruise. So here is going to be the before and after, and then you just have to repeat that process throughout the skin for dodge and burn. And this photo didn't really require a lot of dodge and burn, it's micro dodge and burning. So I'm going to zoom out, take off this layer, and now for global dodge and burn, that's where you want to add a little bit more contrast to the entire image as a whole. So for this picture, usually what I'll do for limbs is I'll brighten up the center of the limb, like the leg for example. And then what I'll do is, if it is already like kind of contrasty, then I'll just brighten the middle of the leg and not really do anything else. But if there is a little bit of lacking contrast, then I'll go ahead and add darkness to the edge of the leg. So let's just do that very little bit. Now I'll go ahead and just deselect dodge and burn and add it back. And you can see that it just added a little bit more contrast to the legs. And you just pretty much repeat that same process. Add a little bit of brightness to the middle of the arm, and then add a little bit of darkness to the outside of it. But if it is a little bit too bright, like if right now her hand was already too bright, then I wouldn't add any brightness. I'll just add the darkness on the edges. And that's pretty much what I'll do for dodge and burn. So here is the before and here's the after. Before and the after of global dodge and burn. And I think the only thing I want to do right now is just add a little bit of burn, global burn, to the shirt, because I feel it's a little bit bright right here. And I think after that, then I'll just adjust the colors. So this is the before, and then here is the after. Yeah, it's just a tiny little bit bright. When it comes to adjusting the colors, I'll always use the selective color adjustment layer. And you can actually get that from either on the top, I think it's in layer, new adjustment layer, and then go to selective color. Or like I do, I always go on this bottom circle here and go to selective color because it's right there. And then this is what I'll do to adjust the colors. And honestly, when it comes to adjusting the colors, I always just have fun with the sliders. I'll adjust the reds. I'll go to that first slider, go left and right and see how it looks like. And if I like it, then I'll just keep it at that level. And I'll just kind of just repeat that process. But when it comes to adjusting not just all these different colors here, but when it comes to the neutrals and blacks, that's where you can make your image a little bit funky. So I'll try in my best. So here's before adjusting the colors, and here is after. Before, after. It does seem very subtle here, but usually with other pictures where there's a lot more prominent reds and yellows, the effect will be much more obvious. And also when it comes to adjusting the black levels and the reds and yellows to be like all the way up here, you know, plus something crazy amount like 60, then you'll see like the contrast become very much more present. So I did keep it subtle for this image. I did it at 6, let's say 15. There's a little bit more contrast there, and I actually do like it. So I'll keep it there. And then here's the before, and here's the after. So now you can see that contrast really come through. So after I'm done editing, then I'll just export it for Facebook and Instagram. I'll make a copy that's full resolution, and then another copy that's for Instagram, and another copy for Facebook, and then I'll be done. And that's pretty much it for this video. If you guys have any questions about anything else that I might have skipped over, let me know in the comments, and I'll reply as soon as possible. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the very next video.